All right, good afternoon. We'll go ahead and call to order the regular meeting of the City of Murfreesboro Board of Zoning Appeals for April 22nd, 2009. The first item on the agenda is consideration of minutes for the regular meeting on March 25th, 2009. Those minutes were included with the packet of materials that were previously forwarded. Are there any changes, additions to those minutes? If not, those minutes will stand approved as presented. Now we're moving on to new business. First item under variance requests. Application Z 09016 by Mr. and Mrs. Phillip and Susan Waldrop, requesting an 8-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot rear setback for principal structures in a residential single-family RS10 zone for property located at 815 Greenbrier Drive. Mr. Brown, you'd review that application for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers, and good afternoon, Chairman Rogers and all the members of the board. As you mentioned, the first item on today's agenda is a rear setback variance request on 815 Greenbrier Drive, which will pull up the
You might want to tell them the TV.
Yeah,
the TVs in here are not on. I think somebody's coming.
All right. As I mentioned, the property is located at 815 Greenbrier Drive, zoned RS10. The subdivision is just to the south of Greenland Drive. In fact, this house right here is on the corner of Greenbrier and Greenland. This is the subject property here, so it's the second house down from Greenland. As you can see, the applicants have a very unusually shaped property, existing single-family residence and an existing pool in their backyard as well. They would like to build an addition onto the rear of their house. And as you can see by this plot plan, it will protrude approximately 8 feet into the 25-foot rear setback. You can see this addition here this area here labeled E, F, and D are the areas that would be added on, would consist of a new master suite and a new sunroom. And the master suite is what it would actually stick out into that 25-foot rear setback. And in order for them to square up the addition and to get the size master suite addition that they wanted, they are proposing to build this corner into that setback, and thus requesting an 8-foot variance. And the justification for their variance request lies with the fact that the property does have a very unusual shape. It's almost triangular in nature because the north side property line is very short, meaning that as opposed to having a 10-foot side setback variance for if it were a square lot, 10-foot side setback variance going all the way up and down here, and then the 25-foot rear setback variance going along like so, the property actually has this 25-foot rear setback that runs along this diagonal rear property line, which makes any substantial addition onto the house very difficult because of that rear setback. I'll show you some photographs of the property. This is the front of the house here. This is looking into the backyard where the addition will actually be constructed. You can see there's the back corner of the house, and the addition will actually go out from that back corner. Or not quite from the exact corner, but a little bit in. And there's a view of the pool. And you can see the rear property line here as it runs diagonally down towards the front of the property. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Both Mr. and Mrs. Waldrop are here if you have any questions for them. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following condition. A surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the proposed addition, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that the building addition is no closer than 17 feet from the rear property line. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
This is a one-story, it's a one-story addition. Right.
I'm not entirely certain, but Mr. and Mrs. Waldrop could answer that question. They are indicating in the affirmative.
So, okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, if there are no other questions in for Mr. Blomley, Mr. and Ms. Waldrop, anything you'd like to add to this application? No. Okay, there they are. All right, then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward to the podium, state your name and your address, and any comments that you might have. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed. Matthew, I did receive an email about this from a neighbor, Jeff Phillips, who I know served with him on the county commission. I guess I'll circulate this among the board members and then include it as part of the record. It's just simply an email saying that he's in favor of the proposed construction.
Certainly, I'll be happy to make that part of the public record.
On the diagram, what sections are being added? D, E, and F?
D, E, and F, if you look on the right-hand side, A, B, and C are symbolize the existing structures, and D would be the proposed sunroom footprint, E would be the proposed master suite footprint, and F would be the proposed covered patio footprint.
And what is B? And obviously it encroaches into the rear setback.
B is the existing pool, and pools, as we consider them detached accessory structures, would only be required to be a minimum of 5 feet, or would only be required to be have a setback of 5 feet off the rear property line. So it is actually in compliance.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
If none, Chairman Rogers, I move that we grant this variance request.
I'll second.
Is that subject to the...
Yes.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. and Ms. Waldrop, that application has been granted. Appreciate you all coming in today. And Matthew, I'll go ahead and give you this email here to include in the record then. Thank you. All right, next item on the agenda is application Z09017 by Ms. Beth Smith for Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity, requesting a 5-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot front setback along East State Street for principal structures in a residential single-family RS4 zone for property located at 226 Kerr Avenue, which is Lot 1 of the proposed re-subdivision of Lots 13 and 14 of the Bilbro addition to Murfreesboro subdivision. So, Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application. Did I state that correctly?
Yes, these next
skeptical.
4 requests were a little bit difficult to put together on the legal notice, but you are correct. The next 2 requests are actually for what is currently one lot of record right now. It's located at 226 Kerr Avenue, which is at the northwest corner of Kerr and State, and I'll show that up to you on the board or on the TV here. There previously was a house with the address 226 Kerr Avenue located very near State Street. On the lot, as I mentioned, it's on the northwest corner of State and Kerr, and it faced Kerr. And since then, Habitat for Humanity has had that house demolished as they have purchased the house and have enough lot area on this property to subdivide the property into 2 separate lots under the existing RS4 zoning classification. As you can see, based on this photograph, this aerial photograph, many of the structures in the area are currently closer and legally non-conforming with respect to the setbacks along the front property lines. In this instance, we are looking at the proposed lot number 1, which is the first of two requests for the same property, as I mentioned. And lot number 1 would actually be the interior lot, which would actually face East State Street. There would be a single-family home built on this property to face East State, and they do not have Habitat does not have a particular house plan for this property in mind yet, as they do not have a family in mind, but they want to go ahead and secure the ability to build on the lot in conformity with the rest of the neighborhood. So they have made setback variance requests for this future lot and for the house that they propose to build on the lot. The lot itself is approximately 90 feet deep by 62 feet wide and about 5,600 square feet. The applicant is showing a 15 by 30 driveway here on the right side of the house, or on the east side of the house. That will be required to be a minimum of 40 feet deep in order to meet the minimum requirements to accommodate 2 vehicles for off-street parking. And the applicant's been made aware of that. Staff believes that the proposed subject lot is a good candidate for a front setback variance, although a single-family home could be built on this lot without any variances. In the past, Habitat has tried to build in harmony with the existing homes in the surrounding neighborhood that predate current zoning regulations and are built much closer to the front property line. After visiting the subject property, staff observed that most of the houses in the immediate vicinity are indeed closer to the front property line than 25 feet. In addition, this request is generally consistent with the recommendations of the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan, which is used as a planning tool for the area by the Planning and Engineering Department, as well as the Planning Commission and the BZA. The plan identifies the subject property, as well as the property next door, as being in the Patterson Park Revitalization District. It is important to note that with regards to the Patterson Park Revitalization District, the plan stated that future redevelopment efforts in this area should focus on the provision of single-family owner-occupied housing as a catalyst for positive change in the neighborhood. The applicant is attempting to honor this particular goal of the plan. With regards to this district, the plan recommends as a key design standard reduced front setbacks to better relate homes to the street. It recommends a minimum front setback of 15 feet and a maximum front setback of 25 feet. And this request is consistent with the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan and the fact that they're requesting a 5-foot variance, which would put them at 20 feet off of the front property line along East State Street, which falls within that 15 to 25-foot recommendation. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following condition. A surveyor will be required to help lay out the footing of the building, and a surveyor's certification must be provided that the building is in compliance with the action of the BZA as well as all other setback requirements. The proposed subdivision plat creating these 2 lots of record must be recorded prior to the issuance of building permits. With that being said, I'll be happy to show you some photographs of the area. This is looking west down East State Street. This is the house directly to the west, which is on the corner of State and the cross street further to the west. And this is the house that is on the northeast corner of State and Kerr, which will be across the street from the lot that we will look at in our next application. I'll be happy to answer any questions either before or after the public hearing. Mr. Roy Saylor with Habitat for Humanity is here if you have any questions for him. Ms. Smith is not able to attend today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
Matthew, I got a quick question. You said they didn't have house plans picked out yet. I guess there's a basic footprint there on Lot 1 of what they're expecting. I think it's going to be that building envelope, or is that kind of a worst case, or the largest piece of property?
I think what they're trying to do is set the parameters. The house that they pick will be less than that building envelope, but that 20-foot front setback gives them a starting point from which they can start, and it may not actually, it may not actually take up, or likely will not take up the entire building envelope. They will not need side or rear setback variances on this property, but that 20 feet will give them a starting point at the front setback line.
Okay.
All right, any other questions, Mr. Blomley? If not, Mr. Saylor, is there anything you'd like to add to this application?
No, sir.
Thank you. At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further comments or motion.
Mr. Chairman, I think the Habitat for Humanity is doing a magnificent job in that area. Looks really good. And with that, I move that we approve the application with the necessary recommendations from the staff.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Saylor, that application has been granted. We'll move to the next application from Habitat. It is application Z09018 by Ms. Beth Smith for Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity, requesting a 5-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot front setback along both Kerr Avenue and East State Street for principal structures in a residential single-family RS4 zone for property located at 226 Kerr Avenue, which is Lot 2 of the proposed re-subdivision of Lots 13 and 14 of the Bilbro addition to Murfreesboro subdivision. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is the adjacent lot, or the proposed adjacent lot to the lot that we just considered. It's Lot 2. And I won't bother showing you the aerial photograph again, but I will show you the proposed plot plan. You can see what they're requesting in this particular instance, too, are 5-foot setbacks off of both the East State Street and Kerr Avenue front property lines. As you know, corner lots in single-family residential zoning districts, in which this is in an RS4 zoning district, have two front property lines and two side property lines, which means they have two corresponding front setbacks and two corresponding side setbacks. And so the front property, or the front setback in the RS4 zoning district is 25 feet. They are requesting 5-foot variances along both East State Street and Kerr Avenue to give them the flexibility as far as whether or not they place that house on the lot closer to State Street or further away from State Street. Right now, the plan is to place the proposed house, of which they do not have a floor plan at the moment, on the northern end of the lot, and to have the driveway on the southern end of the lot, but retaining the ability to seeking the front setback variance along East State Street will give them the flexibility, if they do so choose to locate the lot on the southern end of the lot, that it will be lining up with the lot, with the house that will be built next door to the west on East State Street on Lot 1. As I mentioned, there is a proposed driveway on the southern end of the lot. Of course, that would shift to the northern end of the lot if they move the house to the southern end of the lot. At any rate, as I mentioned, they are requesting 5-foot setback variances along both front property lines. The justifications are generally the same as I read to you in detail with the last application. The request is consistent with the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan. And if the board approves this application, staff recommends the same two conditions that were recommended on the previous application. I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and Mr. Saylor is here if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
Mr. Blomley, are you saying that they basically could orient the house toward Kerr or toward State, and that's why they're asking for both, because they don't know which one they want to do yet? Or?
No, they're actually going to orient the house, and if we could bring that back up, that'd be great. Thank you. They're actually going to orient it to face Kerr Avenue. The house on the opposite corner, on the northeast corner of Kerr and State, faces Kerr Avenue, so they want to be consistent and have the house face Kerr. But they do not know if the house will face Kerr on this. Difficult to explain. If they want to have the house on the south side of the lot and the driveway on the north side of the lot, or the house on the north side of the lot and the driveway on the south side of the lot.
Okay.
Either way, it would face Kerr.
Okay. And the entrance would be off Kerr then?
That's correct.
Just depending on what side of the lot? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. Saylor, anything you'd like to add to this application, sir? All right. At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor again for any further discussions or motion.
If there's no discussion, Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the variance subject to staff comments.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Saylor, that application has been granted. Move to the third application from Habitat. It is application Z09019 by Ms. Beth Smith for Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity, requesting a 10-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot front setback along both South Highland Avenue and East Sevier Street for principal structures in a residential single-family RS4 zone for property located at 505 and 509 East Sevier Street, and it's going to constitute Lot 1 of the proposed Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity No. 1 subdivision. All right, Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that application, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is another proposed lot that Habitat for Humanity wishes to create. Actually, this and the next request are currently comprised of two lots with different lot configurations than they are proposed to have. And what I'll do is show you right now the overhead. There are two vacant lots here. I believe the houses were torn down a while back. The subject property is currently zoned RM16, and the applicant has a rezoning request to RS4 pending. Both of these lots are non-conforming in size, but as such, houses would be allowed to be built on them under the RM16 zoning district. However, the lot sizes are not very conducive to homes being built on them as they are currently subdivided. So Habitat, their goal is to re-subdivide the lots to create two more buildable lots. However, the fact that the property is zoned RM16 will not allow them to re-subdivide the lot as it's currently zoned, because the RM16 zoning district requires a minimum of 8,000 square foot lots for single-family development. So while they could keep the lot sizes the same, or the present lot configurations the same, they could not re-subdivide them under the current zoning because the lots would not meet the minimum lot area requirements under the RM16 zoning district. So back in January, they made an application to the Planning Commission to have the property rezoned to RS4, so that, which is actually a down zone from multifamily classification to a single-family classification. But the RS4 zoning district only requires a minimum of 4,000 square foot lot size, so which would enable them to re-subdivide the lots to create two more evenly sized lots that they would be more able to build on. The subject property is located directly across the street, across South Highland from the Clearview Restaurant, and the applicants propose to actually re-subdivide the lots so that they will actually be facing South Highland Avenue. Now, this was upon input from staff, knowing that the streets with the higher classification and the higher traffic volume, we want structures to face those streets to present well to those streets that carry more traffic. So they will actually split the lot with a property line running east-west and have both houses facing the Clearview Restaurant and South Highland Avenue. Now, here's the proposed re-subdivision. Lot 1 is what we were considering with this application. And because the houses in this area are even closer to the road than many of the houses in the previous area that we looked at for the last 2 applications, the applicant has requested front setback variances for this corner lot of 10 feet so that it will be, so the proposed house, or the building envelope would enable the house to be built as close as 15 feet to both South Highland Avenue and East Sevier Street. Once again, this request is consistent with the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan and falls within the range of recommended setbacks for this area, which is also in the Patterson Park Revitalization District. This is a photograph looking east down East Sevier Street, and you can see how close some of these houses are to the road. And this is looking west down East Sevier Street, and of course Clearview is basically right up on the front property lines on the opposite corner. All of these structures, existing structures, predate our existing zoning regulations. With that in mind, the rezoning of the subject property to allow for the subdivision of the land as proposed has been recommended for approval by the Planning Commission, and the City Council has held a public hearing and has passed the rezoning from RM16 to RS4 on first and second reading and is awaiting third and final reading, and I believe that will be on the City Council's agenda tomorrow night for third and final reading. At any rate, if the Board approves this application, staff recommends the following conditions. The rezoning of the subject property from RM16 to RS4 must be passed by the City Council on third and final reading and must go into effect. And then the other 2 recommended conditions are the same as on the previous 2 conditions. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. And once again, Mr. Saylor, who is a very busy man these days, is here if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Saylor, anything you'd like to add on this application? Okay. Then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward. All right, and seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further comments, questions, or a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that the application be approved, subject to the staff comments.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Taylor, that application has been granted. And we will now take what I think is your last application here, and that is application Z09020 by Ms. Beth Smith for Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity, requesting a 10-foot variance of the minimum required 25-foot front setback along South Highland Avenue for principal structures in a residential single-family RS4 zone for property located at 505 and 509 East Sevier Street, which will be Lot 2 of the proposed Rutherford County Habitat for Humanity #1 subdivision. Hey, Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This property would be Lot 2, as you mentioned, which would be just to the north of the corner lot that we looked at before. Here would be Lot 2. Now, this is actually the only one out of the 4 that we've seen today that they actually have a family ready to go and a house plan already picked out, and I'll show that house plan to you on the overhead in just a moment. They are requesting the front setback variance of 10 feet along the front property line of this proposed Lot 2 along South Highland Avenue. One thing that I neglected to mention with the last item was that the driveway, there will still be enough room for the required off-street parking on Lot 1, and that will come in off of off of East Sevier Street for Lot 1. The required off-street parking will come in on the north side of the lot of Lot 2 to the north of the house, so that will keep the required parking off the street and on the private property. As I mentioned, they do have house plans for this particular lot. We've got the front elevation here. This would be facing South Highland Avenue, and this would be the rear elevation of the house. And these would be the two side elevations. And got a photograph to show to you with regards to the structure just to the north. You can see how it relates to the street. As you can see, it's relatively close to South Highland Avenue as well, and the applicants are attempting to build the houses along South Highland, generally consistent with that house and the surrounding houses. And once again, the reasoning that with this being consistent with the Manny Avenue Comprehensive Plan is the same as the previous three requests. And if the board approves this application, staff recommends the same three conditions, including rezoning of this property to RS4 going into effect. The same three conditions as were on the previous application. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and as you know by now, very well, Mr. Saylor is here.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Saylor, this is your last chance now. You sure you don't? Well, all right, we appreciate you being here. All right, then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve this variance request subject to staff comments.
I'll say.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Saylor, congratulations. That application has been granted as well. We appreciate everything that Habitat for Humanity does in Rutherford County. Thank you. All right, we'll move on now to application Z 09021 by Mr. Devinder Sandhu of Sandhu Consultants for Mr. Tamay Ozari, requesting a 5-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot side perimeter planting yard with a waiver of the requirement to construct a side perimeter planting yard along the eastern property line, and a 5-foot variance from the minimum required 5-foot front perimeter planting yard with a waiver of the requirement to construct a front perimeter planting yard along the western property line. And this is for property located in the commercial highway zone located at 630 West Burton Street. And then pertaining to the same property, the applicant is also requesting variances from the requirements that a detached accessory structure used as a dumpster enclosure may not be located less than 5 feet from the side or rear property lines if it is less than 200 square feet in floor area, or less than 20 feet from the rear property line if it is greater than 200 square feet in floor area. All right, Mr. Blomley, I would accuse you of contriving a exceptionally complex description there.
I think David is rubbing off on me with his legal jargon.
That was very thorough description there.
I try.
All right.
The property, as you mentioned, is located at 630 West Burton Street. It's an old building that's been there for decades. We pulled that up on the overhead now. You see it here. It's currently been stripped of its former facade, and it's essentially been gutted on the inside. This property is located directly to the east of property that the state has acquired. This is state right-of-way directly adjacent to Memorial Boulevard that the state will use in the future for its road project at a date to be determined at some point in the future. But it's acquired it for the road project at the intersection of Broad and Memorial. So the applicant actually this is technically a corner lot being adjacent to two public rights of way. And based on the amount of the value of the improvements that the applicant is proposing to put into the property, the zoning ordinance requires that the whole site come into compliance with our landscape ordinance. Despite the fact that this lot is an existing lot, the building contains an existing development that has been non-compliant for a number of years, especially with regards to the landscaping. But based on the improvements to the site is required to meet the landscape requirements. And you've got a copy of the site plan in your packages. As you saw in the aerial photograph just a moment ago, the existing entrances into the property bisect the east and west property lines. The driveways are shared driveways, one with the location of the former Kelton's Feed and Seed directly to the east, which has now moved to Old Fort Parkway. It's just a vacant building right now. And then a portion of the applicant's access along the western property line is actually on the state right-of-way. State right-of-way actually bisects that driveway that the applicant's property relies upon for ingress-egress. As you can see on the site plan, the applicant is proposing to do a number of site improvements, including completely paving all of the travel areas on site, including the easternmost drive as well as the westernmost drive. Well, the westernmost drive is paved as it is, but as well as the rear of the site. There's an existing old accessory building back there that will be removed, and in the back corner of the site, the proposed dumpster enclosure will be located. Now, in working with this tight site, the applicant has staff believes has placed the proposed solid waste enclosure in a very appropriate place that will be in the most remote corner of the site, and it will still remain very functional for the solid waste vehicles, the private solid waste vehicles, to pick up. So the applicant is not certain at this point what size the solid waste enclosure will be. That's one of the reasons for the convoluted language in the legal notice and in the agenda, is that there are different setbacks for solid waste enclosures depending upon their size, but we feel that regardless of if it is less than or greater than 200 square feet, the location that is proposed is a suitable location for that solid waste enclosure, and that will be landscaped and will consist of a solid screen wall for the dumpster. Also included is a landscape plan which shows improvements that the applicant is proposing to make at the front of the site, the front of the site facing West Burton, as well as in the rear of the site, maintaining the required landscaping along the rear of the site and the front along West Burton. But as you can see, the existing development of the site poses some problems if he were to try to comply with the side planting yard along the eastern property line and the front planting yard along the western property line, because that 5-foot perimeter planting yard that would be required, not only would it not allow for enough room for traffic circulation with the current site design, but it would also infringe upon the existing driveway aisles and the ability to continue to use the site as it has been used in the past, as far as the internal circulation of the site and the ingress and the egress to West Burton Street. Just as a point of reference, I did want to mention to the board that the area that's in the state right-of-way, the applicant has provided documentation from TDOT. While TDOT says that this is not an easement for them, that they are granting them the rights to continue to use TDOT's property as a part of their to function as a part of their site plan. So they have received written permission from TDOT to continue to use TDOT's property. Now, just to show you what the building will actually look like. This will be the front of the building facing Memorial Boulevard. And instead of doing before and after, I'll do some after and befores. This is what the building currently looks like right now. It may be familiar to many of us in the audience. And maybe some of us who ate ice cream there when they were younger. Mr. Young.
That's right.
This is looking north from West Burton Street. This shows the existing paved area. And as I mentioned, in order to have the required front landscape yard, it would have to essentially be placed right in the middle of the existing asphalt that's on that site, part of which is on the private property and part of which is on the state right-of-way. This is looking back towards West Burton Street. The parking spaces will be parallel or perpendicular to the building, and there's the escort. This is looking north along the eastern property line. This gravel area, which has been used for access along the eastern property line, will be paved, and the dumpster enclosure will be back in this corner of the property. This is looking back towards West Burton along that same property line. This is the building that I mentioned earlier behind the building behind the principal building that is going to be demolished with the redevelopment of that site. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Sandu is present if you have any questions for him as well.
Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Will they tow that escort off that lot before they start construction?
Some may prefer that. Not me. I believe it's a classic, but that's just my opinion.
For sale sign on it this morning.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
I got a quick one. On the area that's, they got the easement, when the construction on Broad Memorial takes place, does that affect any of their ingress easement? I don't suspect the road's getting that close, but will they have to make any changes in that?
I believe that is going to, and Mr. Sandu can speak to this in more detail because he's been in contact with TDOT, but I believe that area will end up being kind of, I don't want to say surplus property, I don't know if that's the right word, but I believe it's going to be outside of the area that they're actually going to be working in. Okay. There will actually be a driveway that goes up towards Chambers Music that will be further or closer to Memorial Boulevard than this particular property is.
Okay.
Yeah, I was a little confused in coming into it. I really thought the narrow end of the building that faces, is it Burton right now, was going to be the front, but you're saying it's going to be the left side. If I'm facing that side of the building, it's going to be the left side that's going to be the front, which kind of faces Memorial.
Yeah, like you said, it kind of faces Memorial, and prior to the state acquiring that property, there was a private property there and a building, I believe, a development, but I believe they are looking to face it towards Memorial Boulevard.
Okay, and then so help me understand. Then the access to get there, is it going to come still from Burton?
That's correct.
What will be between the parking lot then and Memorial? Just landscaped area?
That will be there will be an access drive for Chambers guitars, and then it will be the very northernmost portion of the area that will be as a part of the state, the flyover project over Broad Street.
Okay.
So Chambers won't have access to Memorial? Is that what we're saying?
That's
Will
correct.
not?
That's correct. They will not have access to
Okay.
Memorial. You see the page that looks
Yeah.
like this?
I saw
and
that.
you see the dark line there is the access that will be provided by TDOT to the present Chambers
Okay.
site.
Brought this up. Footage, set of construction plans.
But what this request does is it doesn't require them to have a planting yard between the front of the building and this access drive.
That's correct.
their parking lot's going to come off the access drive, or at least part of their parking will be in front of that building?
Yeah, the parking will be in front of the building, or it will be in between the building and Memorial Boulevard. The access will still remain off of Burton Street in the same fashion that it is right now, using the same existing driveways.
So the only people using the access drive will be Chambers. They won't be dual. I guess there'll be no need for that.
Yeah, I don't believe any access from that access drive for this site is proposed.
The way it's designed at this time, it would not be a joint access drive to this facility of, this West Burton property and the Chambers building. That would not be a shared joint access. They would be completely separate. There'd be landscaping or at a minimum grass in between the driveway into the Burton property and the driveway that's going to go on to Chambers.
Yeah.
As time goes on with TDOT, there might be a change in that, but the way the plans are at the present time, it would not be shared access. Chambers would have their own private drive from the end of what will be a turnaround at West Burton. West Burton will no longer connect into Memorial, but if you're going basically westerly on Burton, you'll make basically a U-turn to the left and come back down on
College.
on College. And if you were to go straight ahead on that, basically you would end up in the Chambers driveway, or you could turn off to the right, headed that way on Burton, and access this building.
Mr. Blomley, just kind of following up on Chairman Rogers' question on how this thing will face, I'm assuming, but I'd rather you correct me, that the south elevation that we are seeing that's what going to be facing Memorial, not Memorial, but if you're coming up on Memorial, heading towards, like you're going to go to State Farm down the road, is that what you're going to see, is the south elevation, or are you going to see the north elevation?
Mr. Halliburton, if we look at the elevations, I think that, and Mr. Sandu can correct me if I'm wrong, but the west elevation will be the long part of the building facing Memorial Boulevard, and what's shown as the south elevation will actually be what you see if you were to drive past it along West Burton. There will be a door and an awning facing West Burton. However, the main door and the sign for Chef Mart Cooking Solutions will face the Memorial property line.
You described it better than I. That was my question. I just couldn't describe it right.
And so isn't there already a grass strip there on facing West Burton, and they're asking not to take that out, basically?
No, that would still, one of the confusing parts is that because technically it's a corner lot, because the western property line faces state right-of-way, you have two front property lines and two front planting yards. The front planting yard along West Burton, that would remain. The grass area that's in front of that building facing West Burton would remain, and they would actually be adding plantings in that area. The front planting yard along the western property line facing Memorial, because that is in the middle of the existing access, that would not be added to the site.
So the sides then become back where the dumpster's going to be, and then the rear access, which is...
Well, technically, because it's commercial, it would have two fronts, a side and a rear, and the side would be the eastern property line, and the rear would still be...
Okay. And there's no rear planting yard, so it would be the side planting yard that we're forgiving, which is where the side where the dumpster is going to be back there as well.
Yes, yeah, and the rear, the northern property line, they would be able to maintain a landscape yard along the northern property line. And if the board approves this request, staff recommends the following condition. The site plan must be reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, or reviewed and approved administratively by the Planning and Engineering staff as determined by the Planning Director. And they've submitted the site plan for review by staff, which I believe that is being reviewed administratively because there's no building taking place other than site work. I believe that's being handled on an administrative level. But if the board approves these requests, staff recommends that that condition of approval.
Mr. Blomley, I'm still struggling to get the access part of it in mind. The construction drawings are showing that the access, if I'm on Burton facing the building, the access is going to be primarily on the right side of the building. Are they then going to kind of swing around that Burton elevation of the building to come around to the front of the building to access the front? Because the other access goes directly to Chambers Guitars, and you said there is no access from that into this building.
That's correct. We pull the site plan up here on the overhead. So here's West Burton Street, and these are existing access points we've got along the eastern property line, being accessed off of West Burton Street. We've got an existing drive that is partially graveled and partially paved. They propose to fully pave that, and the property line, the eastern property line, and the side planting yard here along the eastern property line is one of which they are requesting a variance on. The other drive is here off of West Burton Street, and by which the subject property currently gains access as well, and it actually has a drive which goes in front of the building on the West Burton side, and here's the grassy area here. So it actually has two-way entrance points that are connected both in front of the building along the south side and will be connected along the north side of the building once that building is removed and some additional paving placed here.
Okay, the easement on the left is what I have a question about. Is that an easement, because most of it is not even on their property? Is that the prescriptive easement that they have over the state right-of-way?
It's not. The state is saying that they are neither confirming nor denying that it is a prescriptive easement, but that they are giving the applicant use of the property. And I think that's in the letter that the state sent to them, is that they're granting the applicants the use of the property, but it's not being technically termed an easement.
Well, what if the state decides to makes a decision on that issue and says, no, that we own that and you can't go across it? How are they just then going to access it using that easement, or excuse me, that access point on the right side of the building off of Burton? You couldn't back in and out of those parking spaces at the front elevation,
right,
if they took that away.
That's correct. Their plan hinges on on that permission from the state.
Chairman Rogers, in normal circumstances, we would require that an applicant such as this have a written document that's going to be recorded and legally enforceable, granting them access easement rights over this adjoining property. Planning Director and I have reviewed the materials, including the correspondence from the state on this matter, and we think there's a fairly reasonable likelihood that the owner of this property, whether it's this applicant or another person, will be allowed to use this property substantially forever. As part of the site plan, however, the planning staff is asking that they present a Plan B, which is some way that they will be able to continue to utilize this building in the event that the state should come back at some point and say, we're withdrawing our permission and you can no longer use, and it'd be the cross-hatched area that shows up on the drawing that's attached to your materials. The cross-hatched area, as you're looking at it on paper on the right-hand side, because of the nature of this and the long term of it, no one really knows for sure when that flyover project will get under construction. and designs could change, plans could change, but the state does have that whole property from this property line over to what the current Memorial Boulevard. And if the state goes forward with the plans substantially as they are presently drawn, they will have to provide a driveway that you see on the construction plans on this sheet for Chambers to access their property, because the state did not acquire the entire Chambers property, but as part of that agreed that they would provide this access. Of course, obviously, all of that could change in time, and we are also, along with asking this applicant to provide a sort of a Plan B in the event that the state does withdraw its access, we will document that the applicant understands that the city is not warranting their continued use of this state property, and if for some reason the state should revoke its permission, that the applicant is undertaking that risk. And if it should turn out that this then in fact becomes an unusable piece of property, that's the applicant's risk, not our risk. We see that as a fairly small percentage likelihood, but it is a possibility.
The hatched area is not on their property, right?
Yes, the cross-hatched area is the area that
It's the easement.
this applicant, the predecessor of this applicant, apparently had used for years as a shared driveway, shared access area with the former owners of that property before the state acquired that for the intersection.
So if that goes away, then you cannot use those parking spaces on the, looking at this on the left side of the building there.
You certainly cannot use them as head-in perpendicular parking the way it's designed.
I can't imagine you could use them, period.
It's probably too narrow to use as angle parking, and the business owner will have a substantial problem on his hands if he loses that.
He couldn't get the required parking, could he?
I don't know for sure. That's again, planning staff has asked them to come up with a Plan B, and whether there's a possibility of parking in the front.
It'd be
through,
back to us to get rid of that front plant.
A variance at that time to allow them to remove the semicircular green space area. Whether you could get enough parking if you did that, I don't know. I haven't tried to study that. I don't know if the applicant's engineers have or not. But yeah, they would. This layout will not work if the state revokes its permission for them to use that cross-hatched area for their driveway.
I think one thing to remember, though, that independent of whether or not they have permission from the state to use that area, the variances are sort of independent from that in the fact that whether or not the state grants them the ability to use that area, in order for this site to function, the landscape variances are essential in either instance. So, whether or not years down the road they have to come back with a plan if the state revokes that permission, these variances to the required landscape yards are essential to the operation of the site, whether it's being used as it has been for years or whether or not they have to come up with an alternative plan for internal circulation around the site.
Yeah, that is correct. And it's important that the BZA understand the site operation, but to some extent their use of this hatched area as driveway is not really pertinent to our decision today, to the BZA's decision. If they in fact are required, as standard zoning ordinance would require, that they have a 5-foot planting yard on each side of their lot, then as a practical matter, this lot may not be usable at all, and certainly not usable for this as presently planned out. And whether they're entitled then to avoid that landscaping and to have that requirement varied because of the fact that it's a pre-existing lot, that there have been changes made to it by other people. These are not changes that this owner had put into place. That then is the question for the BZA in terms of whether or not these landscaping variances should be granted. assuming that these variances are granted, then they've still got to work out the details of this site plan to make it work, with either the planning commission or planning staff. And I think this would be a staff reviewed plan as opposed to one going to the actual planning commission. But this is a difficult site to work with because it is fairly small, and more difficult because of the fact that they are relying on access that has apparently has been historically for quite a number of years used by the prior owners of this building, this facility.
So our conditions, if it were to be approved, are sufficient to protect the city at this level. The liability issues the city might have be addressed at future levels. That was one of my questions.
I believe, yes.
And so if we were to approve this subject to staff comments, we're not opening up the city to any sort of liability as a potential down the road revocation by the state of their license.
That is correct.
Okay. So you're happy with the conditions if it were to be approved?
Yes.
And I guess just to make the record, I think the owner submitted a letter. His attorney has researched that, and I think he has a different position from the states. And so, everybody watching this, I guess, and for the owner, I think they have a prescriptive easement there, and of course the state disagrees, and that'd be for them to duke it out at some later date. But I guess I'm with Chairman Rogers. I just didn't want us to be in the middle of that to the extent that maybe anything we did would have any impact on that. So.
Well, I'm not certain if the state disagrees.
But they don't
not
affirmatively agree.
They're not at this point, at least, willing to agree to the extent of actually executing an easement document, but they are willing to agree to the extent of putting in writing an authorization for these people to use that part of the property.
One could read into that, I guess.
A fairly significant step in some ways, but of course the state, as I guess for the most part any government, is never
reluctant.
We can't bind future governments, and they can change their minds as well. Sometimes it costs them when they do, but they can change their mind. And in this thing, I think the state is protecting itself. They're not guaranteeing that they're going to have it forever, but the indications are that this is a relatively low risk bet. But nonetheless, they do not have an absolute guarantee that they're going to have the perpetual use of the hatched area that shows on that page for driveway purposes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any other questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Mr. Sandu, is there anything you'd like to add to this application, sir?
Yes, sir, if I may.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, members.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for indulging us on this very interesting, challenging development of this corner, which we believe will greatly improve the view shed as folks enter Murfreesboro, coming off of Memorial and Broad. The client is going to greatly improve this little block building and improve the face of it, and hopefully we can get some good business for him there and some good tax revenue for the city over the next few years. The issue about the easement from the state, or the lack of an easement or access, or however you want to call it, developed because of the tight nature of this lot and because of the historical use of this property, with its neighbors having joint access. If you look, as you saw on the drawings, the driveway to the west, which is on towards Memorial, is a shared driveway. It was installed, I imagine, by the city, although when I went to Public Works to talk to them, they don't remember ever installing that. But it is an existing installed driveway that pretty much splits the property bound. It's split along the property boundary. Same thing on the east side. The access on the east is not wide enough between the property boundary and the grass area for a vehicle to get through. So historically, that also has been shared. The reason the state is not giving written documentation for an easement, according to Barry Ford, the state right-of-way person that I spent some time with on this issue, he said, we don't generally give easements, but we will give you access. That's done routinely all across the state. Additionally, he said that we've spent almost $500,000 in purchasing this property, and countless hours and dollars of attorney fees. Mr. Sumner Bolden, who provided you the letter on our behalf, giving his opinion on this being a prescriptive easement, was also involved in the case with the state and the owners of that property in the condemnation processes. And according to Mr. Ford, once the state condemns a property and they have it as a right-of-way, they're very reluctant to give it up. And they're not going to sell that except for in very unusual cases. And they feel that this intersection at Broad and Memorial is going to happen. And this is one of the drawings that I had passed over to you is their latest stab at how they're going to make it work. They are going to close off College and make that a semicircle. It's going to be hairpin turn going back. Burton is going to come back and go into College, and access to Memorial there is going to be closed off. Additionally, the access to the Chambers property is going to be closed off by the ramps and I guess the flyover that they're going to try to install at that intersection. And the main reason they acquired so much of that property, in fact, the whole piece of property that's west of my client's property, was to provide, the sole reason, according to Mr. Ford, was to provide access to the Chambers property because their access off of Memorial is going to go away. Now, they only need a 20-foot access lane in there, but they essentially had to acquire that whole property to provide that access to the Chambers. And because of that condition, that Chambers are going to have to access their property off of West Burton, the state was not at all reluctant, and I found this surprisingly refreshing, that they did not hinder or block our attempt to gain access on what we claimed was historically an easement. And they have essentially given us an easement, though they're reluctant to do so in a legal manner. They welcomed us to go to court and get a court opinion from an attorney, from a judge, which we said, if you guys are giving us access, there's no reason for me and for us to go to the expense of drag this out over the next months, years, I don't know how long it would take, to get that as an easement, declared a prescriptive easement. So I think my client is happy to take that risk. It's, according to Barry Ford, it's very unlikely that they're ever going to go back and take that property back and not have that access. In fact, I think there was an email from him that was given to planning. I'm not sure if I gave that to Mr. Blomley or not, but there was an easement that addressed that exact issue, that is the state ever going to take, is there a chance that the state is going to take that access away? And Mr. Ford has essentially said, no, they're not going to take that access away. Now, the planning department is requiring us to do a Plan B for this site in case that access is not there. And we'd be happy to do that, but I consider that to be an unnecessary expense for my client right now, because the state has essentially given us access. And this project is maybe 5 years down the road. And if the state then takes away access within the next 5 years, and we've already been using that property based on them granting us access, I think they're going to maybe not look so good in the press or in the public opinion that they have granted and then taken away access after an owner developed a property based on their based on their decision. The parking requirement for this site is 11 spaces. We have tried to do it assuming that we had no other access, either on the east or the west, and would have had to install the planting yards as required. And we can squeeze it in, but we lose a lot of green space and a lot of other features at this site that we were trying to protect and preserve. This gives us a little bit of the best of all scenarios in all cases, and allows this property to be used as it has been historically. So I would request that you look at it from the practical standpoint. Legally, yeah, there's always a chance, but in business, my client is willing to take that risk, and most businessmen take risks all the time, and this is a very, very minor risk, in my opinion, in his opinion. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have on this, and I'm open to those now.
Thank you, Mr. Sandu. Any questions for Mr. Sandu?
Not related to any of the easement issues we've been talking about, but I guess, curiosity more than anything. Are you going to use the shell of the existing, is this a demo, complete demo, or are you going to use the shell and build around it and do a different facade, or what's your client's?
The shell is remaining. We plan on using the shell. The only demolition will be the little storage building in the back. There used to be 5 offices in this place at one time. I don't know how they crammed all those in there, but it used to be retail, then it went office, and now we're going back to retail again.
Okay. Thanks.
The dumpster and the dumpster pad are going in the northeast corner of the property, is that right?
That's correct.
But you said earlier that without the easement on the east side of the property, you can't get vehicles up and down that lane either. Is that true?
No, it's not true. What I said there was that currently the space between the east property boundary and the edge of that planting area that's there now is not wide enough for a vehicle to get through. We do plan on widening that side a little bit. I think we're going to make it 16-foot wide, but still use the full width of the combined access driveway.
Because on the plan, you're showing the ability to access the dumpster pad going just a straight shot
Correct.
from Burton all the way back to the northeast corner of the property.
Correct, because we're going to widen, we're going to remove a little bit of that green space.
Okay.
That's between the east property boundary and the green space.
Okay.
So
Now-
we'll have a little wider space there for the vehicle to go through.
Now, that obviously is, I would think, going to require a truck to come a straight shot in, and then a straight shot backing up, back out.
It could back out. That's why we have. That's why we'd like to have the circulation going around the other way. The truck could actually back in, pick up the unit, and then drive west and come in along the front of the building
Okay.
And if the cable
without
department,
having to back up all the way.
if the cable department would put up a photograph, they'll see the side of the property that Mr. Rogers is asking about.
Right. So that little grass area there is going to go away,
Part of it will.
and then it's going to be straight shot straight up that driveway there to the back of the property, and then the truck's going to back up and then turn left and go around that side of the building.
Unless he wants to back up all the way.
Unless you drive back all the way up, take out that light pole. Okay. All right. That's all the questions I have.
Well, I just had a comment because I'm not an attorney or anything like that, but thankfully we do have 2 on the board, Mr. Dodd and our chairman. But if I read a letter like this, I read the letter that the state sent you, and it says, please understand that TDOT is neither denying nor confirming that an easement exists. I don't know if this would bother me. As you stated, it doesn't you, but it just bothers me that they could come back and deny you this. I mean, it would worry me if it was my property.
If I may, what they're neither denying or accepting is an easement. They are granting us an access. They are granting us an access drive and an access driveway. So they've essentially said that you can use this property like you always have, and that is what a prescriptive easement is all about. So they've pretty much laid the case, if we ever have to go to court in the future, to say that, well, yeah, it's a prescriptive easement. They agreed to it, to giving you access.
That doesn't bother you in at all?
No. No, I mean, we were happy. We could, the only way the state is going to grant an easement is to go to court. And that was an expense that we didn't feel like it was worth the effort to go get that. And it would have put the state in an awkward position of having them spend more money with attorneys and go to court and defend this little piece that they really don't have any use for the property that's between our property line and the chamber's access way that they're providing. That's just going to be there. And they're happy to have somebody else take care of that little bit of property. So I think my client is going to take care of that for them, and the state won't have to come in there and deal with that.
Thank you.
So it's a little bit less headache for them.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Sandu? All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or a motion. There's essentially three variances here, but I guess we need to take those separately.
I think that would be best, yes. And Ms. Mosby, your concerns are why staff is going to have the record documented clearly that the applicant is assuming the risk, because in this fairly unique situation, staff shares the applicant's opinion that it's a small risk, but it is a risk, and it would be a very impactful risk if it were to come about. And I would not have an opinion as to the outcome of litigation if they sought to establish with a court decision, a court decree, that they in fact do have a prescriptive easement. There certainly are some facts that would point to that, but those are not easy to achieve in court, and I wouldn't predict either way. Nonetheless, we think it's a fairly small risk in this circumstance, and if they're willing to accept that risk, then staff is willing to work with them to certainly provide a nicer looking building in our community than what's there at the present time.
All right, then we'll go ahead and take first the request for the 5-foot variance of the minimum required 5-foot side perimeter planting yard along the eastern property line. You have a motion on that?
Mr. Chairman, I move for approval, subject to staff comments.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we'll move on to the next request, which would be for a 5-foot variance from the minimum required 5-foot front perimeter planting yard width for the western property line. Do I have a motion on that one?
So moved. And
Second.
with the staff comments there.
All right, have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that has been granted. Then we'll move to the variance request for the requirements that a detached accessory structure used as a dumpster enclosure may not be located less than 5 feet from the side or rear property lines when it's less than 200 square feet or less than 20 feet from the rear property line if it is greater than 200 square feet. Is there a motion on that one?
Make a motion we approve, subject to staff comments.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. Sandu, that application then has been granted in its entirety. Thank you very much. We appreciate your patience with us coming in today.
This was a difficult one. I very much appreciate it.
Yes, sir. All right.
Good luck.
Thank you. Good, good. Looking forward to that.
You need to pay him a little extra and get a plug in for you.
All right. We'll now move to special use permits. Application Z09022 by Ms. Jennifer Khalifa for Goodwill Industries of Middle Tennessee, Inc., requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center in a commercial highway zone for property located at 1825 Old Fort Parkway, and an 8-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is an application that we've seen in the past 2 years at the Board of Zoning Appeals. And as you know, temporary mobile recycling centers within the city limits can be approved for 12-month periods at a time. And temporary mobile recycling centers are considered just that, temporary. So annually they have to come back before the Board of Zoning Appeals for a special use permit. Ms. Khalifa, on behalf of Goodwill, has made applications for the 2 locations that Goodwill has maintained in Murfreesboro for a number of years, and has made a request for a 12-month renewal from May 1st of this year through April 30th of next year, at which time the applicant would have to come back again. According to the applicant, the donation trailer has been at this location since July 2005, and it averages 79 donors per day. A letter from the Lowe's store manager has been submitted granting Goodwill use of the parking lot for the storage center, or for the recycling center. And in addition, the Goodwill trailer was approved on a Lowe's site plan approved by staff in 2007, the particular location. And I'll show you on the overhead where it's at. I think we're all pretty familiar with this site. It is right on the western edge of the Lowe's property. The Target property is on a separate piece of property, and the trailer is maintained at this location, and it is manned during its operating hours. Because the trailer is 48 feet in length, which is 8 feet greater than the maximum 40-foot length for temporary mobile recycling centers, both this and the next item are seeking variances to the maximum length of the trailer as well. And now just for this and the next item, as I mentioned, I'm sure all of you are familiar with these, but this is typically what they have out there. It's the 48-foot trailer from a semi-trailer, and there's usually a little staircase at the end of it leading up where the center is manned and folks can donate. And the trailers are then, when they're full, hauled off, and then a new empty trailer is brought in until it gets full again, and then it's hauled off overnight, and a new one's brought back in the morning. Kind of on a cyclical basis. At any rate, I'll be happy to answer any questions about this request. Both the special use permit and the variance request will need to be taken in separate motions, and we do need to hold a public hearing on this, and Ms. Khalifa is present if you have any questions for her.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
Mr. Blomley, is this the same size that we've approved in the past? Is the 8-foot variance been part of the request?
Yes, sir. Identical request to the previous 2 years.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Ms. Khalifa, anything you'd like to add? All right. At this time, we'll conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application? All right, and seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further. Excuse me, we got to take this in 2 separate motions. We got to first, let's consider, I guess, the special use permit to operate the temporary mobile recycling center in a commercial highway zone. Is there a motion on that?
Make a motion we approve the special use permit subject to any staff comments.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll move then to the 8-foot variance request to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. Is there a motion on that?
I make a motion that we approve the 8-foot variance with the recommendations of the staff.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Khalifa, that application has been granted for the Old Fort Parkway location. We'll move now to the Memorial Boulevard location. Application Z09023 by Ms. Jennifer Khalifa for Goodwill Industries of Middle Tennessee, Inc., requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary mobile recycling center in a commercial highway zone for property located at 710 Memorial Boulevard, and an 8-foot variance to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length. Mr. Blomley, if you can review that, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is for an identical application for a different location. If we can pull up the overhead now, you can see on the aerial photograph here is the location of the temporary mobile recycling center, i.e. the semi-trailer that Goodwill uses in the parking lot at 710 Memorial Boulevard, which is the Murfreesboro Athletic Club shopping center. They're just to the north of the property that we looked at on 630 West Burton Street. The applicant is seeking a 12-month extension for this location, just the same as at the last location. We have not received any complaints regarding the operation of this mobile recycling center, and operation will be identical to as it has been in years past. If the special use permit is approved, staff recommends the following condition: the semi-trailer shall not be located within a driveway aisle, and all parts of the semi-trailer shall comply with the minimum 42-foot front setback of the commercial highway zoning district. Be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, if not, Ms. Khalifa, anything you'd like to add to this one? All right. At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for a motion or further discussion on the issue of the special use permit request for a temporary mobile recycling center in the commercial highway zone.
Mr. Chairman, I move we approve the special use permit subject to staff comments.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on that? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we'll move next to the 8-foot variance request to the requirement that no receptacle shall exceed 40 feet in length.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion we approve the 8-foot variance with the staff comments.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Ms. Khalifa, that application has been granted as well. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in today. All right, we'll move now to application Z09024 by Ms. Margot Chapman of Crown Castle for Cricket Communications, requesting an amendment to a special use permit approved on April 11, 2001, in order to construct a telephone transmission tower in a residential multifamily RM16 zone located at 1134 Old Las Casas Road. The applicant wishes to amend the special use permit in order to increase the height of the existing tower by 10 feet from 120 feet to 130 feet. The applicant is also requesting a 95-foot variance of the 35-foot maximum permitted building height in an RM16 zone in order to allow the 130-foot tall structure. This is a 10-foot amendment to the 85-foot height variance that was also approved on April 11, 2001. Lastly, the applicant is requesting a 29-foot variance to the minimum required 35-foot rear setback for a 130-foot tall tower. Mr. Blomley, you're just trying to torture me now.
I swear it was unintentional. But yes. This one ended up being a little lengthy on the legal notice as well. It was, after looking at it, there were a few things that unfolded that I'm glad I caught in the process of reviewing it that needed to be addressed. As you mentioned, the applicant originally had a special use permit for this site approved back in, actually I believe it was a different applicant at that time. Back in 2001, on April 11, 2001, a special use permit in an RM16 zoning district for a telephone transmission tower, i.e. a cell tower, in an RM16 zoning district. In addition, because the maximum height of structures in the RM16 zoning district is 35 feet, the applicant was granted an 85-foot height variance for the tower. And as you can see in the package, there is the confirmation letter from April 11, 2001 by Mr. Scott Ferris, previously employed by the Planning Department. The tower and the height variance were approved subject to the tower being of stealth construction as well as its co-locators being of stealth construction, there being a 12-foot landscape buffer, and that the tower would collapse within a 50-foot radius. The applicants have made a request to amend the special use permit to allow for a 130-foot tall tower. They would like to add 10 feet on to the existing tower in order to support a fourth carrier. This would also require an amendment to the height variance that was approved at the same meeting, which was previously 85 feet, now would be 95 feet in order to allow for the 130-foot tall tower. That 130 feet goes to the absolute apex of the tower, including the lightning rod, so that covers the whole structure that they are proposing. If we pull up the aerial photograph, subject property is located at 1134 Old Las Casas Road. It's directly behind or to the east of a small commercial building, which is legally non-conforming commercial building in a residential zoning district. Mr. Stroop owns the subject property, and there's a lease area in the back corner which houses the telephone tower. You can kind of see the shadow of the tower right there on the aerial photograph. This is Old Las Casas Road, and this is the intersection of Brown with Old Las Casas. And as you can see, that there is an existing apartment complex that was developed after the subject property was built, or after the tower was built. And this has been, the apartment complex has been developed within the last several years. This is a pre-existing apartment complex directly across Brown Drive. Now, one of the things that the board is always concerned about when we're talking about cell towers, new construction or enlargement of cell towers, is the fall radius, and that was evidenced by the conditions that were placed on the original approval back in 2001, that there be a no more than a 50-foot fall radius. And while we see the larger on that sheet, you see the larger radius of 500 feet identifying property owners within 500 feet. You see the smaller radius here, which is a little over 46 feet, which identifies what the structural engineers have identified as the fall radius for the tower with the 10 feet addition on top of it. So they are going to be able to maintain, according to their structural engineer, that 46 or the 46-foot fall radius, which is under that 50-foot fall radius that was required back in 2001. In addition, I asked the applicants to provide a letter from a structural engineer stating that the existing tower would be able to was structurally sound enough in order to be able to handle a fourth carrier and the 10-foot extension. And they did provide a letter, and that's in your packages as well, stating that the tower is of sound enough construction to be able to handle the additional 10 feet and the additional antenna that will be placed on that 10 feet. You can see there are a number of components in the compound. The compound is surrounded by an existing chain link fence with barbed wire on top, and there is vegetation along the north, east, and south sides of the property or of the existing compound. There will be an area here in which some additional equipment will be added inside the fenced-in compound for additional equipment for the new carrier. All right, and I don't know how well this will show up, but here's the existing tower and the existing 3 antennas, 1, 2, 3, and the 10 feet that they are looking to add is right up here at the top, obviously. So I like to state the obvious sometimes. Some photographs of the existing site. Here's looking at the property from Old Las Casas. This is Mr. Stroop's commercial building here, and the tower to the rear of the existing building. This is looking in from Brown Drive towards the parking lot and back of the site. A view of the existing compound from the parking lot. Another view of the compound. Another view of the compound. Sounded like a broken record, aren't I? There's a view of the landscaping that's around the east side of the site, adjacent to Dr. Agarwal's apartment complex. That's another view of the landscaping. I may be redundant if not thorough. There's another view of the landscaping there looking north along the eastern property line. The applicant has received documentation from the FAA stating that its determination of no hazard both for the 10-foot additional height to the tower, as well as a total of 150 feet area for a crane to come in and actually put that tower on there. So we have the documentation from the FAA determining that this would not pose a hazard to air traffic, as well as a letter from, or an email from Mr. Chad Gerke, the city's airport manager, confirming this. One of the things that I wanted to detail for the board, and this makes things a little bit complicated. The tower, when it was originally approved and built, was all on one lot of record with Dr. Agarwal's property. This was before it was subdivided by Mr. Stroop for the property to sell to Dr. Agarwal for the development of this apartment complex. So essentially, there was a great deal of space. There was no property line directly adjacent to the tower. In looking at the plans, staff realized that the subdivision of this property, the subdivision of the property that was later sold to Dr. Agarwal, created two issues, one of which had to be advertised and was the reason for the rear setback variance for the tower. The rear setback requirement in the RM16 zoning district is 25 feet. The tower is currently 6 feet from its rear property line, which would be this property line here, which means that the tower right now is in violation of the required setback by virtue of the fact that of the subdivision plat that was recorded creating this lot, creating the non-conforming nature and location of the tower itself. So we have advertised for a rear setback variance, actually a 29-foot rear setback variance, because for structures that are over 100 feet, they have to be set back from the property line an additional 1 foot per 3 feet that it is over 100 feet. So for a 130-foot tall tower, it would have to be set back an additional 10 feet to the 25-foot rear setback, which means that since it's only 6 feet away from that rear property line, in order for a 130-foot tall tower to be erected, a 29-foot rear setback variance would be required. In addition, when this property was subdivided, the required landscape buffer on the eastern side of the property essentially was subdivided off of the property onto Dr. Agarwal's property. And I'll show you what I mean. You can see that the property line runs along this dark line here, and you see the property corners. All of this landscaping is actually on Dr. Agarwal's property. So the landscaping that was required as a function of the Board of Zoning Appeals 2001 approval is actually on the adjacent property, which, so the applicants essentially are utilizing a buffer that's no longer on their property. With that being the situation, and as an alternative to property owners trying to work out easements among each other, what I have recommended, and you'll see this in my staff comments, as opposed to requiring any buffer at all, in lieu of a buffer, and because there's actually no room, especially on that east side, to plant or maintain a buffer because it's on the adjacent property, I've recommended that the board consider an 8-foot tall white polyvinyl fence, much as was required around the equipment area at the base of the tower at the Family Worship Center on Sulphur Springs Road. That has been installed, and staff believes it is a good alternative to that landscaping and can be maintained on the erected and maintained on the property line, as opposed to encroaching over the property line as the landscape buffer does now. And I have some photographs. Those are photographs of the existing tower at the Family Worship Center that was approved last year, and that would be the type fence that I've communicated to the applicant that I am recommending to the board as an alternative to the landscaping that is on the adjacent property, or in lieu of having landscaping around the base compound. In addition, I would like to point out that the property owner, Mr. Stroop, has been notified that the subject property is in violation of the zoning ordinance right now. For two reasons. There's been an expansion of the parking lot without approval, and with a surface that does not meet our minimum requirements. There's been a gravel expansion of the parking lot. And also there is some contractor storage on the back of that property, which is not permitted as a part of that commercial development. So Mr. Stroop has been notified about that, and he's actually being very proactive and has taken the steps to hire a civil engineer, and his civil engineer, Huddleston Steel Engineering, has submitted a site plan, and he would like to actually expand his parking lot and bring it into compliance. But staff recommends that if the board approves this request, no building permits will be issued until the site is fully in compliance with all city zoning and property maintenance regulations, because there are actually, in addition to the zoning violations, there are some property maintenance violations from our Building and Codes Department as well. In addition, staff recommends the other conditions that I've listed. The subject development must receive site plan approval from the Planning Commission or administrative site plan approval by the planning and engineering staff as determined by the planning director. And in lieu of a landscape buffer, the existing chain link fence around the entire perimeter of the lease area should be replaced with an 8-foot tall white polyvinyl fence, the same as in the pictures. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Ms. Chapman is here if you have any questions for her. And as with the other requests with multiple items, each item would have to be taken in a separate motion.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? Blomley, I've got a couple questions. First of all, my questions involve the 2001 application and what happened. This place looks like a train wreck right now. There's no 12-foot planting yard, and I think, you know, you can add to the list of violations at this property. There's no 12-foot planting yard currently, and this is not a stealth monopole. This is a monopole, but it's not a stealth pole. Stealth pole means the racks aren't sitting outside the pole; they're inside the pole. There's 3 racks, that are at least 3 racks on this pole that are outside this pole, and I don't know how it got constructed in that fashion. When it was clear in 2001, the board made a condition on it being a stealth pole.
I understand that. I've come in after the fact on that, and I don't know how the situation got to where it is right now. I apologize for not having that information.
Sorry, I'm not fussing at you. I'm just fussing in general. Okay.
Who's responsible for, if this fence is erected and we're saying that the landscaping area, are we saying that they no longer have to have a landscaping area?
Yeah, in my opinion, the fence would serve the same purpose as the landscaping area. As you saw in the pictures, the landscaping area is not maintained very well. It's kind of overgrown.
So whose responsibility is it to maintain it?
That's
Mr. Stroop's or the folks that own this tower?
Either or. It's Mr. Stroop's property. He owns it. However, he has a lease agreement with the tower owner, so that would be between them to work out which one of the parties is responsible. In this case, staff feels that the purpose of screening that base area would be served by the fence, and especially along the eastern property line, because with the subdivision of that property, we find ourselves in a position where there's no room for a landscape buffer along that eastern property line. Staff has attempted to come up with a solution that will achieve the objectives and still maintain everything on the subject property and not encroach onto other people's property.
All right, any other questions for Mr. Blomley? Ms. Chapman, anything you'd like to add to this application?
I'm Jimmy Arbor, and we have requested a crown for this publication.
Mr. Yarborough, if you just hold your comments till you get to the podium.
My name is Jim Yarborough, and with Cricket, and we requested this extension for Crown to extend this tower, and for coverage, primarily for the MTSU campus area, trying to blow into the campus there. We did not realize that the tower was in violations until we got into it. Crown had acquired this tower several years ago. They didn't build the tower. I think Sprint, Nextel built the tower. So as far as stealth, Cricket would do the flush mount, not the big brackets, and less impact.
Are you willing to take responsibility for the landscaping, or are you going to leave that up to Mr. Stroop?
Crown will, yes.
How long have you owned the property?
Anybody who's speaking would please come to the lectern and identify yourself and speak into the microphone, please.
Tom Scobie with Crown. We purchased it in. I can't give you the exact close date. It's been just under 2 years. We purchased it from Global Signal, who I believe had purchased it from Sprint, and Sprint was the original builder of the tower. And as far as keeping up with the landscaping, yeah, that's something we should be taken care of, and we do have folks that go out in the spring, spray, and should be keeping the weeds. Obviously, we should have had that taken care of, but obviously, if we do put up the white fence, that would be up to us, Crown, to maintain, and/or any issues you have with the landscaping would be Crown. That shouldn't fall to Mr. Strick. We'll take ownership for that.
Any other questions, comments?
And do I understand that is this pole in use now? Is the tower in use?
Yes, there are currently three carriers on there right now.
Did they say they were going to go to the stealth pole, or with the new ones are going to be stealth, or is it going to stay the way it is?
The new one, then the fourth carrier will be flush mounted. It won't be of the stealth construction that Chairman Rogers was referencing a moment ago, where it's inside the pole, but it would be flush mounted like two of the other carriers are on there now. I think one is not flush mounted that's on there right now.
So how do we approve this without making them come into compliance with their prior approval? I mean, isn't that kind of implied, and, I mean, does that make sense?
Well, the special use permit amendment, if you were to approve it, would be to approve it as per the set of plans that they've submitted here today, and/or any changes that you have as conditions of approval if you choose to approve the request.
And so then you're saying staff would have to seek remedy against them for being in noncompliance with their prior approval with the stealth pole?
No, essentially they're
Are we going to say grace over them being out of noncompliance if we approve this? What I'm trying to say.
If you approve this today, I believe that what would happen is that their plan, as it's been amended here before you today, would be what is approved.
To understand correctly, that Sprint was one that built the tower, so they're really the ones that built something outside of what their prior approval was, and now these gentlemen were taking it over. So while it's out of conformity, I guess, of the prior approval, it's not something they changed and reinstalled, or I guess they kind of got handed this issue.
I think they said they bought it about 2 years ago, and it was erected in 2001. So it had been in existence for a number of years, and it appears that staff did not catch, and when those co-locations came in, did not, and even when the tower was first built, it does not look like it was caught that those were not of what was committed to the board back in 2001.
All right, any other questions before we do the public hearing? All right, then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward, state your name and address, and any comments that you might have.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Bill Patterson, 1215 Raleigh Court in Scotland Acres. When this tower was initially built, or the process for the approval, the Scotland Acres people fought it very fiercely, and also with the Old Las Casas Road neighborhood, which has since undergone a change. But for the reasons that have been displayed here, this property has always had code violations, and it's always the owner is notified and they're going to do something about it, but it would draw on and draw on. So that's nothing new. The reason that we were given in 2001 that this tower had to be built is there was not any coverage at the library at MTSU, and that by building this tower, all the problems would be solved, and that would be the end of the issue. And now we come back and find out they don't have enough coverage at MTSU. So we think that the owners should be required to go by the initial approval to having the stealth tower, that the property be kept like it is. And I'm curious, since the property surrounding it has been sold, would that fall zone have a detrimental effect to Dr. Agarwal should he build other apartments on property that he owns. I don't know how that figures out, but I would hope that you would make the applicants go by the original approval, and let's not get any more of that tower. It's big enough as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. Any questions for Mr. Patterson? Thank you, sir. Any other comments on this application?
Mr. Blomley,
You want to go ahead and
I'm sorry.
You want to go ahead and close the public hearing? You ready?
Go ahead.
All right, this time then we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed. Yes, sir.
My name is Ron Knoll. I live at 2231 Woodridge Trail here in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I'm the Regional Site Acquisition and Development Manager for Cricket Communications, and I'm in charge of building most of the towers within the southeastern United States. Going along with the gentleman's concern concerning being able to talk or be able to receive transmissions inside the building at the library, I do not know which one of the companies first went before the board to ask permission to go in to that building area. This is the fourth company that's coming in, Cricket is. As Cricket Communications, what we're trying to do is provide a service to the population, not only on Middle Tennessee State University campus, of which I graduated from in 1965, but also the outlying areas. Currently, we're providing not only low-cost telecommunications to the dorms, but we're also providing low-cost communications, hopefully in the future, for wind and also high-speed internet access over the air. The tower is configured right now, may not have been in compliance over the last couple of years. Our intent is to make it in compliance if we were given the other 10-foot extension. Communications is a business. A business is such that multiple companies work against each other trying to provide to the customer the lowest cost they possibly can. Cricket is considered one of the lower cost companies in the nation right now. We're trying to maintain a capability for the college and the university and its student body to use our low-cost system. And we would request that you would take a real good jaundiced look at this, because you've got other communications facilities that are providing a higher cost student body requirement to pay for the usage of land and communications. We're also interfaced with E911, and we'll be interfaced with E911 here in the community. That will allow students that might be in buildings that, when you have lockdown on Middle Tennessee State campuses, on the campus itself, when the phone systems are not capable of being used for cricket inside buildings that are closed off, E911 can be used inside those buildings. So the 10 feet, the question I have of you, is it worth a life if you can't get somebody on the phone to tell them that they need help? So that's basically my point with telling you why we're trying to do this for the system, and for the student body, and for the metropolitan area here in Rutherford County. Thank you very much.
Chairman Rogers, may I ask for some clarification from this gentleman?
Sure.
I thought I heard him say that if they were approved, they would
bring the tower into compliance.
Yeah, bring the tower in. Does that mean that you would work with the other?
No, what I'm talking about is what you said you wanted me to do as far as compliance into the stealth process. We will build the tower to your stealth compliance. I have no way of forcing the other communications companies that have gone on that tower that got past your zoning to force them into compliance with what your requirement was.
You're talking about the extension.
I'm talking about the extension.
Okay.
Extension amounts for me. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, I misunderstood you.
Yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Knoll. Any questions? Any other questions for Mr. Knoll? All right. Anyone else present wishing to speak for or against this application? If not, then we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for further discussions or comments or motion. And
Mr. Blomley, you mentioned as part of your comments that no C of O would be given or permits would be given until the code violations had been remedied. My opinion would be is we either defer it or deny it until the code violations have been taken care of, period, and not grant the door to even be open because these code violations have been there for some time. So hopefully that these would be remedied, before we would even approve something like this, would be my opinion.
Is the fact that it's not stealth, the term code violation, are you including that in that, or are you talking about the setbacks and things like that?
No, the violations that I was referring to are the violations that are outside of the leased area on Mr. Stroop's property, the use of the property for contractor storage, and the illegal expansion of the parking lot with a gravel surface.
And that's what you're talking about as well.
Yes.
But not, your comments were they directed toward the failure of the pole to be a stealth pole, or inclusive of the other?
And everyone else could have a different opinion. I think these folks have gotten in a quagmire with respect to the fact that it wasn't built right in the first place. I'm not sure, just my opinion, I'm not sure we can use that against them. However, at the same time, I think it's kind of a slap in the face to the Scotland Acres folks that came in droves to be against this, and we tell them it's going to be one thing, and it turns out to be another. For whatever that's worth.
I will absolutely second that. I was here in 2001 when we granted that application. I vividly remember having a lengthy public hearing over that, hearing concerns from Scotland Acre people, and that was during the proliferation of cell towers. And this, I would think, it falls under the, we can't just go in and buy up stuff and blindly fall back on other people and blame it on them. This is a caveat emptor kind of buyer beware thing. We go back and we look at when this cell tower first originated and is in compliance with the original application. And if not, then something needs to be done before we buy it. I don't have a lot of sympathy for the argument that we fell into this. I think that to honor the application granting from 2001, the concerns that were expressed in 2001 by the Scotland Acre people, and just to uphold the integrity of a BZA finding, that the entire pole has to be cured before, in my opinion, before the application can be granted.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah, I think the pole has to be, it has to come in compliance with the 01. The methodology of that, can we pass it subject to a condition that it be brought in, or do we defer it and allow them time to remedy that, or how? I'm open to discussion about that personally. Now, if it's obviously somebody wants to make a motion to deny it at this point, but I'm in agreement that the pole has to come in with compliance with the original passage of BZA in 01, and it's not. So now, obviously, Cricket is the one interested in wanting to go on to this, and I understand their position. They can't make other people, but this approval really isn't about Cricket. It's about the pole and the owner of the pole and the owner of the property and their requirements to keep it up. Basically, Cricket's just a tenant, and the structure is what's out of compliance, and so either the owner of the pole or Mr. Stroop or whatever these contractual relationships are going to have to get with whoever hung the racks, and shouldn't have hung the racks to get that cleared up, in my opinion. Now, do we pass it subject to them doing that, or do we ask them to defer? Or, I think, to me, that's what's up for discussion, how we handle it.
Mr. Blomley or Mr. Ives, if we deny this at what point can they come back to the BZA? Is there a time frame?
18 months.
Chairman Rogers, if I may, it would, I think these issues are sufficiently significant that a conditional approval might be questionable on this, a deferral for at least a month to do some further investigating by staff and by the applicant into how this got away from what was approved in 2001, which obviously predates both Mr. Blomley and myself, but there should be some ability on our part to find out what happened and what kind of a cure is possible. I don't know the technology well enough to have any idea whether this is curable by any means other than completely tearing down this pole and replacing with a different pole. But that's something I think we should discover and report back to the board. And then, unless the board is of a mind to deny this, and the board certainly can do that, if the board is not convinced that this should be denied at this time, then I would recommend a deferral as opposed to a conditional approval.
And to add on to that, what I would like to do is to further research in the 2001 file, to further look at the plans to see just what was committed to. Because obviously in my looking at the 2001 file, there was perhaps I didn't give it a good enough look when initially reviewing this application, and I would like to go back and do a more thorough job of researching that 2001 file, as well as going to our codes department and seeing whether or not anything changed between when it was approved by the Board of Zoning Appeals and when application was made for a building permit to erect that tower, so I can try to reconcile what's before us today with what was approved and with what was permitted back in 2001.
Sounds like a great idea.
If there's no further discussion, I'll make a motion that we defer, but I want to make it clear that before we were to approve anything, that the code violations would need to be remedied at minimum, irrespective of what's decided upon the poll in and of itself.
So in your motion is the deferral is subject to it coming back before the board only after Mr. Stroop's violations have been.
That's exactly what I'm saying. That's my motion.
I'll second it.
Do we have to have the applicant's permission to defer?
I'm not certain, Mr. Dodd.
We would like to defer.
Yeah, that's, I mean, obviously we need some research too, since we purchased it, and I'd like to hear what happened as well.
Okay, applicant has indicated their agreement and desire to defer. So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any further discussion, questions about that? All right, if not, then all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. That application has been deferred, I guess, to next month's.
It will just be indefinitely, one, until Mr. Stroop comes into compliance with his zoning and codes violations, and two, of course, when we come back, I'll have a report with regards to my research. But I think Mr. Halliburton definitely got his point across that it does not need to be back before this board until Mr. Stroop is in compliance with the city regulations.
Great. Okay. Thank you. All right. We'll move on then to the next application. Okay. Tell you what, let's do this. We're going to take a 5-minute recess just to give us all a break, and we'll resume here in about 5 minutes.
Assuming
All right, we'll continue on with the meeting now. We're at application Z09025 by Mr. and Mrs. James and Jennifer Hosey, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a group daycare home in a residential single-family RS-10 zone for property located at 1619 Shelley Street. Mr. Blomley.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The property is located at 1619 Shelley Street, which is a small portion of Shelley Street that's disconnected from the Shelley Street that most of us are familiar with. This is only about a block long, and I'll show you on the overhead now. It runs from its intersection with Taylor Place right here, north just about 4 or 5 houses. The applicants live here at 1619. Property is zoned RS-10, residential single family, and they would like to operate a group daycare home out of the subject property. As you can see, the area is predominantly single family in nature, and there is a multifamily complex directly to the rear or the west of the subject property. As you know, the zoning ordinance allows family and group daycare homes to be permitted by special use permit in single family residential zoning districts, and the applicants are requesting to be able to care for the maximum number of 12, which is allowed as a group daycare home. The applicants currently reside at the 1,600 square foot single family residence on the subject property and will continue to do so. And they've submitted information, basic information regarding their daycare, as well as information addressing the standards of general applicability and the standards for group daycare homes. The proposed hours of operation will be Monday through Friday from 6:30 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. According to the applicant, regular drop-off times will be from 6:30 a.m. until 8:30 a.m., and regular pickup times will be from 3:30 p.m. until 5:30 p.m. The applicants have indicated that they do not intend to have any outside employees working at the group daycare home, that it will only be operated by the two of them. However, of course, the state will dictate whether or not there are any outside employees required. Our zoning ordinance requires documentation from the state that such group daycare home will be able to meet all state licensure requirements. We have been informed by the state in prior instances that they will not provide this documentation prior to the zoning approval being given, which in essence puts the applicants in a catch-22. So what we did with our last application is made the application contingent upon proof of licensure being shown to staff prior to the applicant going into operation. I'll show you the proposed layout. You'll see the proposed site plan here. The driveway off of Shelley Street is a single car width driveway, but will actually accommodate 2 cars wide back here in the or 2 cars beside each other back in the parking area to the side of the house. As you know, one of the requirements of the zoning ordinance is that for group daycare homes that no backing out onto the street will be allowed. And typically, there's one of 2 ways that applicants accomplish this for their clients, is that they will either add a circular driveway, which is sometimes what applicants choose to do, or they add a small turnaround area so that clients can come in, park, then back up here, and then be pointed back out towards the street. And that's what they have proposed to do. They proposed a 19 by 24, 19 foot deep and 24 feet across area where even if a car is parked in one of those spaces, it's wide enough for 2 cars so that 1 car could then back out and then be pointed back towards Shelley Street without backing on to Shelley Street. While staff is always an advocate of a hard dustless surface, for numerous reasons, the applicant has requested, however, to be able to have this 19 by 24 area be of gravel, so it'll be at the board's discretion whether or not they allow the applicant to proceed with that gravel area or to make that a hard dustless surface, such as concrete or asphalt. The existing driveway is asphalt as it leads back from Shelley Street to the rear of the property. This 40 by 40 area would actually be the play area for the daycare. The daycare would actually be housed in the rear of the existing house, and the 40 by 40 area here would be surrounded by a 6-foot tall wooden privacy fence, and that would be the area that the children would actually play in, which would leave a large area of their backyard for their own personal use and for their pets. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions either before or after the public hearing. If the board approves this request, staff recommends the following conditions. As mentioned, the applicant must comply with all state of Tennessee daycare licensure laws and requirements, and evidence of licensure must be submitted to staff's review prior to beginning operation. And number 2, the turnaround and privacy fence must be installed prior to beginning operation. And Mr. and Mrs. Hosey are here if you have any questions for them.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley?
I don't remember the details off the top of my head. What happens if, or what provisions have we done before if the Posies leave the property, it ends when their residence ends, is that correct? And that doesn't require any...
The special use permit runs with the property, Mr. Young. Now, it's the zoning ordinance does make provisions for the board to make the special use permit terminate upon sale of property or upon the applicant's residency at the property ending, so that if you wanted to specify that the approval was just for the applicants and that the approval terminated after the applicants no longer resided there, that would be a condition of approval that you would have within your authority.
Okay. I remember we've done some of those. Okay.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Mr. and Ms. Hosey, is there anything you'd like to add to this application?
I know.
If you would come forward to the podium, that's all right.
I know the staff requested a dustless surface, so we were wondering if it would be possible if we could use a dustless gravel medium, such as pea gravel, for that front driveway addition. So that's the only request that we have. We feel like that would be more, it would look better in our front yard than a giant concrete slab, basically. So,
All right, thank you, Ms. Hosey. Any questions for Ms. Hosey? All right, thank you, ma'am. At this time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. Seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
How big is the house? 1,600 square feet? Street view, just, I don't know, it looks small for 12 kids. I don't know, I wasn't on the ride around, so I guess...
We attended our Dhs Orientation last week, and their requirement is 30 square feet of usable space per child. And so for 12 children, 360 square feet are required to be licensed.
Ma'am, just so our record's clear, would you state your name and address for the...
Jennifer Hosey, 1619 Shelley Street.
Thank you.
Seems like we've had some plans of houses that some people will take like a garage and make that into sort of area. I don't know whether that's a requirement or not. Is there some plans like that that's an area of your house, or is it?
Right now, the rear area of our house, it used to be a carport area that has actually already been closed in, and we use it for a playroom right now for our own children. So that's the main area. That will be the play area, but then we're also going to use our own dining area as the dining area for the children. So we surpass the 360 square feet required for licensure.
Are you keeping any babies at all? Because don't you have to separate them in a different...
Basically, we're going to have not infants.
Okay.
We're going to go for 18 months to 5 years old.
Okay. So you don't have to, DHS doesn't make you separate those?
No, as
Okay.
long as we have a separate area for them to play in.
Yes,
Where
ma'am.
there's infant-related items, that's all they require.
Okay.
Are your own children going to be here? They're going to be in the daycare as well, included in the 12, or how does that go?
They will be there over the summer, but they're school age.
So in the summer, you'll have your kids there plus your 12.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, I mean, even though that's what you'll have the eligibility to do, is that how many you plan on having?
We're not sure. We kind of want to get started and get a feel for what's right for us.
Okay.
We wanted to get approved for the maximum, just in case, but.
Do you plan on hiring anyone to help you with?
No, ma'am. It's just
12
going to
kids?
be me and my husband.
Then that was my question. The staff comments say that they want to caution that the number of employees will actually be dictated by the state.
Yes.
What's the ratio?
Actually, the zoning ratio is lower than the DHS ratio. For 2 employees, you can have up to 15 children, according to DHS.
And that's from 18 months to...
That's, you can have 4 infants in that ratio, and everyone else has to be 2 and older. So out of those 15, only 4 can be under 2.
And one of the reasons why I included that statement was that, if Mr. and Mrs. Hosey in the future decided to take on infants under 18 months, or trying to shift their business model a little bit, and the state comes in and says, because you have X number of infants, we are going to require 1 outside worker. I just wanted to make sure that the board understood that there's that possibility, and that would be up to the state if the Hoseys decided to change a little bit about their daycare in the future.
But of course, we don't have to grant them the ability to have employees, and then that would effectively limit their ability to do what you just talked about.
Right. If you were to say, for example, as a condition of approval, no outside employees, then they would be limited to what they could do as far as like their ability in the future to keep X number of infants.
We are not interested in the future having outside employees, mainly due to the liability issues. So we plan on keeping it just the 2 of us.
Thank you, Ms. Hosey. Have we done a public hearing on this already? We have not. Okay. Are you sure?
I don't think we did.
We didn't? Okay.
I thought we did.
I've kind of lost my place here. All right, then I
Go
guess
back
at
to
this
tape.
time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed. I'm sure I did it. I'm sure. That was deja vu that I had done that.
Well, we gave him a second
Second
shot.
chance.
Better than 1.
All right.
That's right.
Okay. All right, so we're back to questions, comments, or motions on this.
Mr. Blomley, what's your thought process on the pea gravel?
The same as if it were regular gravel.
All right.
I think that for the sake of it being a consistent surface without there being you drive off asphalt into a small gravel area and you got to back up to something that could possibly be the gravel could settle, it could be a different at a different level, and for that small of an area, aesthetically I don't think it would have a negative impact, but those are just the thoughts of staff. Open to whatever the board feels.
I wouldn't be, in this scenario with that many possibility, that many kids, I think I would want it paved or concrete, whatever surface they wanted. Obviously, concrete probably wouldn't look good, but, I mean, because you're going to have to use that, and it's going to have to be a pull-in and a backup and that sort of deal. you're going to be in and out of that little input constantly.
That was kind of our thought process, and if you have two different surfaces, every time that a car goes onto that gravel, that gravel is going to shift or settle a little bit, and it's going to possibly create a little drop-off there.
Chairman Rogers, if there's no other discussion, I'll make a motion that we approve this, subject to a hard dustless surface, subject to the special use permit going away when it's no longer the Hosey's residence, and subject to no outside employees operating within the daycare.
In addition to the two comments that
In addition to the staff comments.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this application? All right, if not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Mr. and Ms. Hosey, that application has been granted. Thank you. Thank you all for coming in today. All right, next application is application Z09026 by Mr. Horst Herman for Grace Lutheran Church, requesting a special use permit in order to expand an existing institutional group assembly use, a church, in a residential single-family RS-15 zone for property located at 811 East Clark Boulevard. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Rogers. As you mentioned, the property is at 811 East Clark Boulevard. It's the site of Grace Lutheran Church. It's located on the north side of East Clark, just to the west of the intersection of Clark and Leaf Avenue. The property is zoned RS-15, and institutional group assembly uses such as a church require special use permits in the RS-15 zoning district. Any kind of expansion to an institutional group assembly use, such as what is proposed, despite the fact that the scale of this expansion is relatively minor, does require a special use permit. And there are two phases to this proposed expansion. First, I'd like to show you the overhead photograph of the property. You can see the existing church building is here. The property is accessed via this drive off of East Clark. And it actually, the length of the property runs all the way back to Hazelwood Street, although there is no development on the rear third of the property, the northern third of the property near Hazelwood Street. The applicant is proposing two areas of expansion just to the north of where that parking lot ends, and this is pointing north going this way. There are two components. The first phase will be a playground area, and that playground area will be a 48 by 70 area enclosed by a chain link fence with playground equipment in it and a pea gravel surface. Of course, the pea gravel surface, no vehicles will be on there, so it'll be a pea gravel surface, which is customary for playgrounds. As I mentioned, that will be enclosed by a chain link fence. In the future, the applicants are wanting to reserve an area for a 40 by 60 pavilion adjacent to the eastern property line. They don't have a style of pavilion picked out yet. They don't have certain plans, and they don't know exactly when that would be constructed, but staff informed them that it would be best to go ahead and include that in the application so that they did not have to come back to the Board of Zoning Appeals for a separate special use permit for that pavilion, that they would just go ahead and make their plans known for that at this time and include it in there. The The improvements would have no exterior lighting except for maybe a security light, I believe, on the pavilion, but there will be no other exterior illumination other than the existing parking lot lighting that's there right now. So we did not require the applicants to submit a photometric lighting plan because we felt that that would be a little bit of overkill considering the scope of the expansion. The one thing that staff recommended in excess of what was shown on the plans was a pedestrian connection from the building to the playground and to the pavilion, and from the parking lot to the playground and the pavilion. It only makes sense that children and their parents are going to be going from the building to the playground and the pavilion, so it would make sense to have a sidewalk so that if the weather conditions have been inclement, that there is a sidewalk or another type of or stepping stones or a pea gravel surface walkway leading back to the playground in order to accommodate pedestrian traffic. No additional parking is needed as a result of these improvements. As I mentioned, according to the applicant, no additional outdoor lighting is proposed for the playground area. There's an existing mature stand of trees and dense undergrowth along the eastern property line, and I'll show that to you now. All right, this is looking, this is the edge of the parking lot, so we are looking right where those two improvements would be planned to go. And you see this existing stand of trees at the property line. And here we're just looking at that stand of trees as you head further to the north along that eastern property line towards Hazelwood. And looking back towards Hazelwood, you can see the apartments directly across the street on Hazelwood. Now, just to give you an idea, I did include a photograph of the looking to the west. Now, there isn't a very good stand of trees along the western property line, but the improvements are all proposed to be on the eastern side of the property. So staff felt that it was more critical that there be a good screen along the eastern property line as opposed to the western property line, because the improvements are relatively remote from the western property line. With that being said, if the board approves this request, staff recommends the following conditions. The subject development must receive site plan approval from the Planning Commission or administrative site plan approval by the planning engineering staff as determined by the planning director, which this type of development would typically qualify for administrative approval. And number two, the existing vegetation along the eastern property line must remain and be maintained in good condition in order to properly screen the residences to the east. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions. Mr. Herman, the applicant, is present if you have any questions for him.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right. Mr. Herman, is there anything you'd like to add to this application, sir?
My name is Horace Herman, and I'm a member of Grace Lutheran Church. I live at 2251 Brandywood Drive. As far as the stepping stones and the sidewalk, we have a partial sidewalk that comes out to the end of the north end of the building, and we will do that after we get the site graded and everything, and then we can find out where the best paths are, and we'll probably use something like stepping stones, which won't be completely permanent. We can move those as we need to do that. And the other thing that I did want, just so you know that we're good neighbors, I don't know, can I use this screen here to show something?
Certainly.
I don't know which way that goes, upside down. That's just a rendering from one of the suppliers we had look at it. There are 3 pieces of equipment. We may put in 2 initially because of funding, but the whole plot would be prepared before that. And we'd have some swings and a 5 to 12-year-old area, and then I guess it's a 2 to 5 or toddler to 5. and that would be the main area. So we're also looking at another vendor who has recyclable materials that are guaranteed for life now that have more of a wood look. We're getting a quote from them. I'm not sure whether we'll do everything in green or not, but at any rate, we're trying to keep that as a friendly area and so forth. Other than that, I think Mr. Blomley has covered. I do want to thank him for instructing me as to the complexities of these things and how to get through them, so I was able to prepare the paperwork correctly.
All right, thank you, Mr. Herman. Any questions for Mr. Herman? All right, thank you, sir. And at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would please come forward. Sure, over there. All right.
We're interested in the results, yeah. I'm Pastor Wink. I serve Grace Lutheran. I reside at 331 Braxton Drive. Been serving there for 9 years, and this has been something that we've looked to offer the children of our congregation, but as you notice the fence, it will not be locked. We're complying with our insurance coverage and everything for liability, but we do anticipate, especially like the apartment, the kids coming in and playing, and that's not an issue for us. It's a joy to have them be able to come on the property and, just be able to care for them and give them a safe place to play. So we're looking forward to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. All right, then at this time, if there are no other comments, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the application with, subject to the recommendations of the conditions of the board.
A second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Pastor, Mr. Herman, it looks like the board is fully behind this new project of yours, so congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Appreciate you coming in today.
It's been interesting. I think I'll stick to church council meetings.
I understand. All right, next item on the agenda, application Z09027 by Ms. Chrissy Russell, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary outdoor vending establishment, shaved ice sales, in a commercial highway zone for property located at 2047 Old Fort Parkway. Mr. Blomley, if you'd review that one for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. The subject property is located on the what is commonly known as the Town Center Shopping Center. It's where Ms. Russell has set up for the past several years. She's actually on there are several different parcels that make up the property, and she is actually on the parcel. I'll show you on the overhead here. She's actually on the parcel that contains the majority of the shopping center. Toys R Us and Target are each on their own separate parcels, and she is in this back row of parking spaces here, directly across from Electronics Express. As I mentioned, Ms. Russell has set up at this location for the past 3 years, and while sites are not allowed to be approved for more than 70 days by the Board of Zoning Appeals for temporary outdoor vending, this is one of the sites that was grandfathered in for 6 months. Ms. Russell has found April to not be such a profitable month as far as sales of shaved ice, and you can understand why after some near sub-freezing temperatures over the last couple of weeks. So she has just made application for 5 months release, and her requests are from May 1st through September 30th, which is within the 6 months that she would be allowed at this site. We have not received any complaints about this site from previous year's approvals. Her hours of application and all of the other elements of her request are the same as in previous years. If you'll recall, last year we had some discussion with regards to the fact that she's got a drive-through component. We did not have any complaints last year with regards to her drive-through, and Ms. Russell has indicated that she will be willing to work with Mr. Balachandra, our city traffic engineer, on on using the exact same setup that she did last year with regards to the drive-through. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following conditions. The proposed trailer, as always, must pass an electrical safety inspection prior to beginning operation. An electrical permit must be purchased from the Building and Codes Department in order to obtain this inspection. The time period of operation will be from May 1st, 2009 until September 30th, 2009. And number 3, the design of the drive-through must be approved by the city traffic engineer prior to beginning operation. With that being said, I'll be happy to answer any questions before or after the public hearing, and Ms. Russell is in attendance if you have any questions for her.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? All right, Ms. Russell, anything you'd like to add to this application? All right, then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or a motion.
Chairman, I'll make a motion that the application be approved, subject to the staff comments.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Ms. Russell, that application is granted. Thank you. Appreciate you coming in. All right, now application Z09028 by Mr. Wesley Reed for T&T Fireworks, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary outdoor vending establishment, seasonal fireworks retailer, in a commercial highway zone for property located at 125 John R. Rice Boulevard. Mr. Blumley, if you'd review that one, please.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers. I'd like to welcome Mr. Reed. Mr. Jerry Stocksit has been representing T&T Fireworks for a number of years, and he's moved into a different role in the company. And Mr. Reed got a nice introduction to our Board of Zoning Appeals meetings, being the 13th and 14th application on today's agenda. So in other words, welcome to Mr. Reed, and he's an Alabama native as well, so I have to...
This is our, Mr. Reed, this is our government form of hazing here. Hazing you. Welcome to, a real warm welcome here that we're extending to you.
We from Alabama are of hardy stock, so I knew that he would be able to take it. At any rate, this is the same location that Mr. Stocksit has applied for a number of years, and T&T has been approved for a fireworks tent at this location from 1997 through 2008, except in 2004. According to the city code, fireworks are permitted to be sold and used in the city limits from June 28th until July 5th, and the applicant proposes to sell fireworks within this time frame and is only seeking approval for the July 4th selling season. The applicant is well aware of the distance requirements and all other requirements and has submitted documentation stating that he will comply with all those requirements, and staff has verified that to be the case. The application appears to be in good order. If the board approves this application, staff recommends the following conditions. Certification should be submitted that the tent is flame resistant or treated to be flame resistant. A fire extinguisher should be kept on site. The city's fireworks ordinance should be posted on site. No fireworks are to be set off on site. All signage is to comply with the city's sign ordinance. The site must pass an electrical safety inspection prior to opening for business. An electrical permit must be purchased from the Building and Codes Department in order to obtain this inspection. The tent must meet all minimum setback requirements for the CH zoning district, and a tent permit must be obtained for the tent. You have the site plan in your application packet, or in your agenda materials showing where the tent will be located. It will be in the exact same location that it has been in the Sam's Club parking lot in years past. I'll be happy to answer any questions, and Mr. Reed will be happy to answer any questions as well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? If not, Mr. Reed, anything you'd like to add to this application? All right. Any questions for Mr. Reed? All right. This time, then, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. Slim pickings in here, Mr. Reed. We'll go ahead and declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
Make a motion we approve, subject to all staff comments.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that application has been granted. We'll move now to the last application, application Z09029. By by Mr. Wesley Reed for TNT Fireworks, requesting a special use permit in order to operate a temporary outdoor vending establishment, seasonal fireworks retailer, in a commercial highway zone for property located at 2000 Old Fort Parkway. Mr. Baum, if you'd review that for us, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Rogers. This is the location that TNT has had approved from 1996 through 2008. It is at the Old Fort Walmart location, and I'll show you on the aerial the exact location where the tent will be located. It will be in this area of the parking lot here. Old Fort's to the south down here. This is the Baskin-Robbins. This is a small strip center across James Lucinski Drive, which runs off of Sam Walton Drive. In other words, the tent will be in the same location it's been for the last X number of years. All other requirements and regulations in our zoning ordinance will be complied with. The application is identical to last year, and we have received no complaints regarding this site. And as a matter of fact, TNT is always good about keeping their sites tidy and cleaning up in a expedient manner after the end of the season. So I always like to recognize good work. So at any rate, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And staff, if the board approves this application, staff recommends the same 7 conditions for this site that were recommended for the previous site. And I'll be happy to read them if you'd like.
We have those memorized, I think. All right. All right, thank you, Mr. Blomley. Any questions for Mr. Blomley? Mr. Reed, anything you'd like to add to this application, sir? All right. You have done an excellent job representing the company here this afternoon. All right. Then at this time, we'll go ahead and conduct a public hearing. Anyone present wishing to speak for or against this application, if you would, please come forward. And seeing none, we'll declare the public hearing closed and open the floor for any further discussions or motion.
I'll make a motion that we approve the application, subject to staff's comments and conditions.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? If not, all in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, Mr. Reed, that application has been granted. Thank you for coming. Good to see you. We look forward to working with you. Thank you. All right, staff reports and other business.
The only thing that I would like to mention is that with regards to Crown Castle's application, if they are not ready to be placed on the agenda under old business to be considered again, at the very least on next month's agenda, I will have, as a staff report at the end of the meeting, a report on the research that I've done through the old files.
That'd be great. Thank you very much for that. All right, there being no other business, then we are adjourned. Thank you.